All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this special event organized by Lambda Literary and Woodland Pattern. My name is Travis Chi Wing Lau, and I will be both a reader and moderator for our event this evening, which will include readings by each of our guests and followed by an open discussion among the readers. We are grateful to Mai Tran and Michael Wendt for bringing us together and for providing ASL interpretation and closed captioning. Thanks also to Pity Milk Press for putting together a beautiful chapbook featuring some of the poems we'll be reading tonight. This chapbook is available as a gift to all who are tuning in live with us now. This is of course being recorded in February, but on the March viewing that you are seeing now, there will be chapbooks available. So please follow the link in the Crowdcast chat to learn about how you can have a copy mailed to you. On a weirdly personal note, today happens to be my birthday, and I couldn't ask for a better gift than to be able to read alongside and be in dialogue with writers I truly love and admire. These poets beside me have modeled what it means to write toward better, more inclusive futures for disabled people. They have each addressed with such urgency and poignancy the consequences of our inaccessible present and the ways it shapes the lived experience of disabled people who continue to struggle for life in the face of a global pandemic. These writers articulate the cryptpoetics of disability justice, which activist Patty Byrne describes as a quote, vision and practice of what is yet to be. Here's to all that has yet to be. I will invite each of our readers to introduce themselves before reading their poems. And after our reading, I've prepared a few discussion questions. Some are selfish questions I've always wanted to ask these writers that might facilitate a conversation among us about the interrelationship between disability justice and poetry. So I will turn it over to Cyrée.
Hi, my name is Cyrée Jarelle Johnson, and this is my poem, Eating the Other. And it starts with a quote from Vincent Woodward from The Delectable Negro. Master eated me when I was meat. Nat Turner's body is long devoured, as were mummies and unfortunate men. I'm sure some slave masters ate their own kin, caught them off guard, leapt up, overpowered them with a group like some fucking cowards. They tasted human blood. They killed again. At the sight of black flesh, they eased a grin. They interred the scraps beneath the flowers that brightened the plantation door. A horror, yet also a treat. A slave turned to meat. If your ship fell, no whale, choose a martyr. Claim delusion, inhale all you can eat. The perverse race record never falters. As you wish, it reads, but don't waste the feet. This next poem is about the earth. It's called Earth, Earth. If you love someone, tell them often the world is dying. Today I am alone. The sun shatters all my eastern windows. The earth herself is human, horny, singular, of changing nature, full of spite. So our love for her will not be perfect. That was never the promise. For humans, love is never perfect, just trying again. Perhaps the trying is itself perfect. The feathered thing that does not fly, a gust into the attic, not out from it. Today I live in Brooklyn, Baltimore, Savannah, tomorrow alone in Oakland, in Jack London Square, at the farmer's market, holding bougie flowers, pondering over wee bundles of spinach, too little for $5. Well, maybe that's the fairest price. I don't know. I am not perfect. Or in Philadelphia, holding a restraining order in a clutch of drear images of my bitten limbs and the poems torn down to their I ams by hands I chose to hold me. Now I am buying an eighth for that burnt out memory. I am walking through a flood in thrifted boots, their souls a maze of holes preying on the good of the earth who, if no one else, is perfect. Riley says the earth is dying. I tell them that's why I want children, Black children who are close to their mother, the earth, who empathize with her bitten limbs, who sort out her problems simmering in the muck of 4 burnt centuries, with the brilliance endemic to all Black children. Maybe they'll go to space, see from above what must be done. Maybe they won't have to go it alone. Maybe they'll have company in other people's children or aliens, or the animals will rise up against us and do it themselves, or the rocks. I heard they cry out under certain conditions. What could they be waiting for now? And since we're on the subject, surely Jesus cared about the earth. I have to imagine the desert was a blur, and yet the views. I assume, however, they'll go to space. From their round window in the dark, they may gaze down at the walls and tracks studding her waist and her vast salt wet cheeks, just a face in the dark, her wild green afro, unpicked for millennia. Love her perfectly and save her with the words their elders knew enough to pass along to me. The great chain sent to heal the earth, though healing her imperfectly, as is the way of humans, healing only partially. After every disaster, we straw up the oil, metabolize the soil intended to kill our mothers, and poison our bloodline. But we, like cracked pearls, never wince at the break. My last poem is a sestina about flying Africans. It's called Cadillac. Those dragged along Earth's spine to Savannah, bolted back home with miraculous flight, rose from the auction block, sweet falsetto, a howl that split a gold road through noon sun that would never open their backs. Perhaps my ancestor lost her dance step into the air. Oh well, sometimes it bees like that. The air too hot to ride, she says, but Savannah slid below the bodies of friends, perhaps the women she slept near, but they could fly. Lacking any reasonable plan, sun glowering her way with pinched lips, a falsetto voice walking from the kitchen, falsetto through gap teeth, not stealing, sucking the air forced through the mouth's pinprick, haloed by sun, glow that swole her life to ruin. Savannah sold her children from under her skirts. To fly seemed the pride of a kicked dream, but perhaps there was something to want even here, perhaps love or sex or God, her man, falsetto in the woods church. She likes that, but can't fly. Heartbreak day to gulf or grave, not the air around her that hovers. Spits Savannah back at her as her back bends. Lo, the red sun with lips to her neck. Generation sunshine grew into gold, into rain perhaps down the windows of cars to Savannah. A Cadillac, brakes never falsetto, always shine like buffed leather. Cheat the air of ego, lifting up to pilfered flight. We were what was better than death, but worse than flight, sucking a tan from milder northern suns, but breath still beaten from our lungs, the air too weak to hold us still. We think perhaps this year will change hope to fact. Falsetto cry out of pews from Philly to Savannah. The coastal birds at falsetto pitch fly to mock us, but perhaps the reborn sun over Savannah will lift us to the air. Thank you.
My name is Meg Day, and this poem is called 10 a.m. is when you come to me. In some other life, I can hear you breathing, a pale sound like running fingers through tangled hair. I dreamt again of swimming in the quarry, then surfaced he when you called for me in a voice only my sleeping self could know. Now the dapple of the aspen respires on the wool, and the shades cut its song a staff of light. Leave me, that me, in bed with the woman who said all the sounds for pleasure were made with vowels I couldn't hear. Keep me instead with this small sun that sips at the sky blue hem of our sheets, then dips and reappears. A drowsy penny in the belt of Venus, your aureole nodding slow and copper as it bobs against cotton in cornflower or clay. What a waste the groan of the mattress must be. When you backstroke into me and pull the night up over our heads, your eyes are two moons I float beneath. And my lungs fill with a wet hum, your hips return. It's Sunday, or so you say, with both hands on my chest. And hot breath is the only hymn whose refrain we can recall. And then you reach for me like I could have been another man. You make me sing without a sound. The second poem is called Portrait of My Gender as Inaudible. and it takes the inaudible from closed captioning. I knew I was a god when you could not agree on my name, and still none you spoke could force me to listen closer. Is this the nothing the antelope felt when Adam lit on his own entitling dubbed family, genus, species? So many descendants became doctors, delivered babies, bestowed bodies, names, as if to say it is to make it so. Can it be a comfort between us, the fact of my creation? I was made in the image of a thing without an image, and silence too is your invention. Who prays for a God except to appear with answers, but never a body, a voice? If I told you, you wouldn't believe me because I was the one to say it. On the first day, there was no sound worth mentioning. If I too am a conductor of air, the only praise I know is in stereo. One pair, an open hand and closed fist will have to do. I made a photograph of my name. There was a shadow in a field, and I put my shadow in it. You can't hear me, but I'm there. Elegy in translation. Forgive me my deafness now, for your name on others' lips. Each mouth gathers, then opens, and I search for the wave the fluke of their tongues should make. With the blow of your name in that mild darkness, I recognize but cannot explain as the same oblivious blue of hold the conch to your ear and hearing the highway, loud and clear. My hands are bloated with the name signs of my kin who have waited for water to reach their ears, or oil, grease from a fox with the goal of a hare, bear fat melted in hot piss, peach kernels fried in hog lard and tucked along the cavum for a cure, a sharp stick even, a jagged rock. Anything to wedge down deep to the drum inside that kept them walking away from wives, old or otherwise, and the tales they tell about our being too broken for their bearing, and yet they bear on, down. Forgive me my deafness for my own sound, how I mistook it for a wound you could heal. Forgive me the places your wasted words could have saved us from going had I heard you with my hands. I saw Joni live and still thought a gay pair of guys put up a parking lot. How could I have known you are worthless? Sounds like, should we do this? Even with the lights on. You let me say yes. So what if Johnny Nash can see clearly now Lorraine is gone? I only wanted to hear the sea. The audiologist asked, does it seem like you're underwater? And I think only of your name. I thought it was you after I love, but memory proves nothing save my certainty. The chapped round of your mouth was the same shape while at rest or in thought or blowing smoke, and all three make a similar sound. This last poem takes its title from the 1990s greatest hit, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's called Reasonable Accommodation, as such that disabled folks are granted access and accommodation only when it is deemed reasonable by the granting party. Reasonable accommodation. You've met me halfway. Between the door to our bedroom and the other I doubt is real, only because you are always gesturing, there it is. As if getting to an exit is as simple as its existence. As if your body, real or imagined, does not make a door a taunt you can point to but not touch. You touch me like I'm a door that won't open. The first fight ended here too. My back to the wall and your body keeping it there. Every hand and mouth an act of contrition in an argument I was sure I'd misheard until you were kneeling to beg me, stay. Only then did I understand. Yours was a language of secret orders, and mine a language of hidden sounds you thought you had to teach me yourself. Tonight, my shoulders relax into the dimples they make in the drywall, the pair of them joining the others in repetition down the hallway, a stampede through snow. Look at the tracks they've left, all the animals my body didn't mean to be. Tonight, there is no feast. Tonight, you are only sorry God's name is the one I choose to say aloud when you touch me like you believe you could put a door anywhere if you just push hard enough. Like if I wasn't so unreasonable, I could just accommodate myself. Like if it's so hard, why don't you just leave? There it is. There I am, opening a door in a wall with a body I should want to exit. You touch me like I'm an animal that needs correcting. You touch me like it's for my own good. And wasn't this my request? Didn't I ask you to speak to me only with your hands? Thank you.
Hey, my name is Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha. This is my cat Zuri, Z-U-R-I. She's going to be part of this reading. And this first poem is called So Good. I keep saying she was so good, but not like Beth from Little Women good. You know, noble, tragic, dying cripple, like the only us you get to see in a movie, but like your regular imperfect crack-ass weirdo, tee-hee, giggle, disabled good. Stacy's dead and it's day 46 or something like that, and day 126 of the pandemic or something like that, and here I am crying quietly on my toilet with my face screwed up silent, reading Dana Smith's poem saying, oh, the horrid friends that were just ships harboring me to you. The young part of me saying Stacy's dead, she's dead, and the grown one remembering how you randomly emailed me one time at 2 a.m. I just want you to know you're so good and right. She loved me like that, and like it wasn't a problem. It was barely a breath between asking her attendant to fork her some chicken and finish sending another organizing text on her phone. I just keep thinking, here we are, a Greek tragedy, or Shakespeare. Doesn't he have a lot of those? We're two brother friends, one of them dies, and one is left alive, mourning to tell the tale. Except we are two disabled brother femmes of different sorts, one hammer-shafted booby, shaved head, endy, limpy, left so fucking bewildered after someone who is arguably a Ella Baker of the movement dies unexpectedly on the morning of her 33rd birthday. Crip life, you can never make this shit up. In a way none of us were praying against, waiting worried for. Being disabled means loving the shit out of all of us that everybody else wants to die. Like, love in a way that most people will never get to be loved, and then watching them die. Because suicide, or it just happens. Or the doctor says low quality of life, or can't figure out where the accessible gurney is stored. You leave me notes tucked in every single library book of my house. Pages fall open to a poem I wrote after we had jambalaya and bourbon cocktails poured out of a coffee urn by Ashby Bart a year ago when you said, I promise if I'm gonna die, I'll tell you. Turns out to be a promise you meant, but it's hard to keep. We are sibling chapters in the same book. I pick up the side of the banner you dropped. It falls out of my hands because this has me that shook. This guy is called Femme Futures, and it's the one that all of this disabled poetry shit poets.org is doing is named after, but you have to make sure to get ASL and CART and not do it in a bullshit way. Thank you. Where does the future live in your body? Touch it. 1. Sri Lankan radical women never come alone. We have a tradition of coming in packs of 4 or 5 minimum. The Thoranagama sisters are the most infamous and beloved, but in the 20s, my Uppama and great aunties were the wild Alvis girls. Then there's your sister, your cousin, your great aunties, everybody infamous and unknown. We come in packs, we argue. We sneak each other out of the house. We have passionate arguments and disagreements. We love each other very much, even when we can't stand to be in the same room or continent for years. We do things like start the first rape crisis center in Jaffna in someone's living room with no money in a war zone. When war forces our hands, we all move to Australia or London or Thunder Bay together, and if the border does not love us, we are what keeps Skype in business. When one or more of us is murdered by the state or a husband, we stay alive whether we want to or not. I'm an only child, and I may not have been born into siblinghood, but I went out and found mine, made mine. We come in packs even when we're alone. Because sometimes the only ancestral sister love waiting for you is people in books, dreams, aunties you made up, people waiting for you in the clouds 10 years in the future. And when you get there, you make your pack and you send that love back. 2, when the newly disabled come. When the newly disabled come, they come bearing terror and desperate. Everyone else has left them to drown on the Titanic. They don't know there is anyone but the abled. They come asking for knowledge that's common to me as breath and exotic to them as well, being disabled and not totally hating yourself. They ask about steroids and sleep, about asking for help, about how they will ever possibly convince their friends and family they are not lazy and useless. I'm generous. We Crips always are. They were me. They don't know if they can call themselves that. They would never use that word, but they see me calling myself that, i.e. disabled. And the lens is blurring. Maybe there is another world they've never seen where Crips limp slowly, laugh, have shitty and good days, recalibrate the world to our bodies instead of sprinting, trying to keep up, make everyone slow down to keep pace with us. And sometimes when I'm about to email the resource list, the interpreter phone numbers, the hot chronic pain tips, the best place to rent a ramp, my top 5 favorite medical cannabis strains, my extra dermal lidocaine patch, it's about to expire, but don't worry, it's still good. I want to slip in a PS that says, remember back when I was disabled and you weren't yet, how I had a flare and I had to cancel our day trip, and when I told you, you looked confused and all you knew how to say was boo as I was lying flat on the ground trying to breathe. Do you even remember that? Do your friends say that to you now? Do you want to come join us on the other side? Is there a free future in this femme of color disabled body? 3. When I hear my femmes say when I'm old and riding a motorcycle with white hair down my back. When I hear my femmes say when I'm old and sex work paid off my house and my retirement. When I hear my femme myself say when I get dementia and I'm held with respect between all worlds. When I see my femme packing it in because Crip years are like dog years and you never know when they're going to shoot Old Yeller. When I hear my femme say when I quit my teaching gig and I never have to deal with white male academic nonsense again. When I hear us plan the wheelchair accessible femme of color trailer park, the land we already have a plan to pay the taxes on, see the money in the bank and the ways we grip our thighs back to ourselves. When I hear us dream our futures, believe we will make it to one. We will make it to one. I know the future lives in these bodies. Touch it. And my last bit, I always feel like I'm on the Muppet Show. I'm actually going to just read this guy, which is called Adaptive Device. I want to give you a poem like an adaptive device that will hold you just as good as your favorite cane, bed, sling, accessible toilet seat, rescue ventilator, cigarette, crushed pocket Xanax, blanket weight, mad map sign. Give you the words that are what I know how to do. Give you the words that will take meaning, make language, make a word house to hold you, open door and firm roofed. The steady tap tap thrum of your cane tip, the steady roll of the charged battery of your chair, your brain humming. What does it mean to call a poem an adaptive device? A piece of beautiful supportive tech that puts in work to keep you alive? Something your doctor will sneer at and never understand. You mean you just walk around with a cane all the time? Something the newly Crips say, I don't want to be, pathetic, I just need a little help. This poem will never be found in a packet of home care instructions. This poem is not taught in medical school. This poem is not behind the counter at the pharmacy or OTC. If poetry is a means of telling the truth, June, and poetry is as sturdy butterfly as the steady cat tap of my cane's dance, then poetry is Crip, then truth is Crip, and this poem is a Crip hand to hold you. This poem is short enough for even my memory to remember it. This poem can be whispered or signed. This poem unspurls from a drooling lip. This poem can be tapped in and sung from augmented communication. This poem is spoken from gesture and nuance. This poem is non-speaking. This poem is Crip kindness. This poem thinks that you are desirable and love is coming, is here. This poem will help you get on and off the subway. This poem is a reason to live. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Travis Chi Wing Lau, and thank you all for holding space with me. This first poem is a lover dead in his 20s after Adrienne Rich. 1. Just before they signed away your right to life, you thought to hide hints behind your gasps because you knew I loved to lean into you, to listen actively as it was the closest we could ever be. 2. The grain of your voice. I did not know that memorials bore such textures. The ivy has already strangled your name. 3. The plains of you were changing, but you chose never to make much of it because that wasn't how you were raised. To outline yourself in enough green to be envied, enough red to be a target. A shot in the back is the present's plain language. I learned from you that being a cipher could be a powerful desire. 4. Wojnarowicz said when it was all over, he wanted us to just drop his body on the steps of the fucking FDA. But I don't know if I have the heart to do that to you. You who I failed to love with any grace, even as your body is something sharper now than it ever was in life, because you refuse the right to amnesia, the linchpin of home and country, red and rusty by your and our brothers' tainted blood, for our touching needed to be untouching, until they were distant forms that only became hard fact in the flows of longing. 5. How am I supposed to cast this flower upon your soil? How do I tell the truth of you when the very words I need were the ones that once bound you, hurt you, and stole away your name? Eulogy, true praise. 6. By the time you could not move, you no longer bothered with the headlines, cheap pundits, because the story still eludes the dainty fingers of press and camera. You were already too busy cleaving hard to that imperceptible space beyond their line of sight. 7. A warrior burying a warrior. No, that's not right. You would want me to write, however inexact or exacting, about a life beyond reproach, so that none of us must apologize for doing nothing wrong. Elegy for Ken Meeks after Paul Manette. Sanitary white meant I had crossed the threshold into the kingdom of the sick, where court is held to an arrhythmia paced to the syllable count of medications dressed in primary colors, the intonation of infections that should not coalesce into names, flattened into names, which claim you, replace you slowly with what gets scratched in the remarks of your chart that I read in secret, but this is how you learn a thing by broken heart. A mnemonics of pain tapped out to the beat you set on the ventilator that I may one day have to silence with my own hands, along with the phrases of skin that go to join dead conversations flowering in the damp corners of the room, more lonely in company, longing for a night full-blooded when we weren't afraid of bodies breaking into sweats, but only the glisten of youth replaced too early by the fluorescence that now crowns you like a debtor for dealing too honestly in whole hearts, and borrowed time measured in cell counts that I track in my notebook to determine whether I'm supposed to gather the best of us for mourning, another brother, another son, another father, another lover, another form, inscribed by legacies nobody wanted, but find on their bodies when it is too late for cosseting by bedside, for that breath will soon extend long enough to be called a parting, a deliverance, a grievance, a war cry. Pithy. All day, all night, the body intervenes. Virginia Woolf. 1. I shrug off my messenger onto the floor and forget to kiss you when I walk through the door. Pith. The pain has its steel hoop around my lumbar. 2. I catch myself tottering, a deformation of my walk. Pith, a family resemblance. The curvature progresses faster than any other before me. I am not yet 30. 3. I take a tumble after I miss the curb. Pith, had you not caught me by the arm, I would have finally broken my first bone. 4. I switch positions before I even alight. Pith, I never thought pain would claim intimacy for its own. 5. I crack 3 different places. It annoys you. It worries you. Pith, they said it would make my knuckles bigger, but it is one of my most futile of pleasures. 6, I submerge myself in an Epsom bath. Pith, smelling like eucalyptus and lavender, is the closest to relief because you can fool at least one of your senses. 7, I lay against you as we watch the ship go into warp. Pith, I laid this way while doing homework all through high school, and my case silently went from light to moderate. 8, I cannot form sentences, non sequitur, organic hesitancy. Pith, I would never wish upon anyone a life in the thickness of fog, the shame of being lost in it. 9, I can't make it up the stairs while cradling the box. Pith, I hate admitting that I will have to depend on you more and more, that you will have to lie to me that it's okay. 10, I am cold and distant. Pith, pain is subterranean, a geography to which you will forever be foreign. To be present is to also be far away. 11, I will myself to take deeper breaths. You think something is wrong. Pith, the shallowest part of me is my breath. Some days feel breathless in all the wrong ways. 12, I look perpetually exhausted. Pith, pain redefines what labor means. 13, I look unhappy. Pith, joy so often feels remote, but you are teaching me that it never left me. 14, I wish it were otherwise. Pith, magical thinking can really be cruel optimism. 15, I choose not to operate. Pith, why should a boy ever have to choose between a life in motion or recumbents? Thanks, everyone. Excellent. All right, so now that each of us has read, I have a few questions for discussion that are open questions for everyone to potentially answer, but don't feel obligated in any way to answer if nothing's coming to you. But these are all questions I've secretly wanted to ask all of you in different opportunities, and this felt like the perfect opportunity to do so. So my first question is, why have you turned specifically to poetry as a means of imagining, expressing, or enacting disability justice? Why poetry is the big question. Any thoughts, folks?
Thoughts? Yeah, I'm a poetic formalist, and I think that part of the reason why is because form is the body, right? Like we talk about our corporeal form, our physical form. And I think that formal poetry, does a really great job of communicating the disabled experience, even without disabled content. I think that it really, in some ways, makes a meta meaning, especially elided form, broken form, etc. I think that it does a great job of reimagining what the body can be on the page without having to be didactic or literal about it. And I think that that's one of the reasons that I choose poetry again and again. It does something that I don't think that prose can do.
I can jump in. This is Leah. I'm not a poetic formalist. I wish I was. But I think that there's something about the accessibility of poetry too, where I think it was June Jordan who was like, you can write poetry on the bus. You know, it's harder to write a novel on the bus. And I've written a lot of poems on the bus and on the toilet and on scraps of paper. And recently on voice memos at the stoplight, which give people heart attacks, but whatever, it's Seattle, nobody honks. So, you know, they're too passive aggressive to be angry if I'm, you know, holding up traffic. And I think that for me, some of my earliest, there's a trauma stewardship to a lot of traditions of, I would say, queer, feminist, Black and brown poetics from the 70s onward, with many of the four maestras who didn't use the D word, but were disabled or mad and definitely trauma survivors, where, you know, I have that story about picking up June Jordan's Things I Do in the Dark and being like, oh, you can write that. And there's something about, you know, June's often cited, like, what's poetry? It's a means of telling the truth, like maximum impact, minimum words. That is a real she didn't use the word spoons, but I feel like June was like, let's get the most bang for our buck with our limited energy and let's tell some fucking truth that can be a weapon and a tool. And that works for me. And along with the tradition of you can be a crazy survivor and write down your rape story in poetry. And, you know, it can be really hard to read a whole survivor memoir that's like Raperton. But I'm really glad that Sapphire and Christos wrote their rape, Black, and Native poems down for my 21-year-old self. And a lot of people who couldn't read my memoir or were like, why didn't you tape a joint to the front of it? You know, because it's a lot. And I was like, I didn't write down the really bad parts. They're like, wow, that's Sistina though. That was cool. Yeah, you get a little bit and then boom. And there's an access to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I'm thinking about poetics as a particular kind of cultural inheritance and linguistic inheritance. And deaf poetics, is there a difference between deaf poetry and just ASL? I don't know. There's a particular lyricism to using one's hands and face and body to communicate. And I think that poetry for me became a way to do the body on purpose, a way that wasn't necessarily compulsory, but indeed allowed a particular kind of agency and control over what one did with one's body and what one did with one's words. And I think the body as a communicative vessel has always been fierce and powerful and deeply upsetting to other people in the way that I think my body has often been deeply upsetting to other people. And so it has always felt, not like an obligation, but like a cultural inheritance and like a right in many ways. You can't take this from me. And so I have to use it in order to not to lose it.
I always find these descriptions of disability poetics so moving because they're so bound up with our very lived experiences of navigating trauma, ableism. For me, I've been thinking a lot about if disability justice is about imagining better futures, more inclusive futures, how does disability poetics serve a kind of speculative function? It lets us ask questions, doubt, and doubt in public in ways that I think other forms of expression don't always allow us. I've been thinking a lot of Yvonne Boland's phrase that gets sort of quoted endlessly, but I feel is super applicable is poetry begins when certainty ends, right? I write often to figure shit out rather than feel like I'm expressing something I already knew. And I feel like particularly with my own experience of coming into disability consciousness late in my life, a lot of it was writing my way toward figuring out whose histories am I responsible for, who am I speaking to and for sometimes, and what do I mean when I invoke disability, even obliquely in my poetry. So I think a lot about poetry as speculation, writing toward knowledge, embodied knowledge for that matter. That leads me to, in some ways, the second question I was going to ask, and Cyrée actually anticipated it. My question is, does disability justice have a uniquely crip form in your work? And how do you understand literary form shaping your crip poetics? So if we're thinking about Meg's earlier point about inheritance, but also about crip formalisms, I'm curious about why your work takes a particular form and what forms you gravitate to. I think for me, I think because I was sort of punished in my early life in terms of learning poetry a certain way, my instinct is to deform poetry as much as possible. But I'm super aware of the fact that this is also a kind of cultural reception, something that I've inherited in terms of my engagement with language and with the English language in particular. But I'm curious what you all think about are sort of grounding reasons for why certain forms appeal to you.
That's to everybody, right? Cool. I can jump in if that's cool with folks. Um, well, I have this piece I just wrote in my new essay book, The Future is Disabled, at October, Arsenal Pulp Press, called Autistic long form, short form, no form ecotextia, which are these, I mean, none of these are new. Like, I know autistic people have written about these before somewhere, we've thought about them, but it was as I settled into really being out about being autistic. It made me really think about my own experiences as both someone who's hyperlexic and non-speaking, and has been throughout my life, but the hyperlexic or hyperverbalities that was super praised and was a survival mechanism, obviously. Um, and the way that sometimes played out in a lot of my writing, both before and after figuring out my autism, was that I'm really known for long lines. And I have been spanked for that a lot, where everyone's just like, no, you got to break it up. And there's ways in which, there's arguments to be made for that around like accessibility and slowing down and different choices. But I'm also just like, no, I'm a fucking autistic long talker. That's who I am. That's my poetic form. And I got to tell you the other thing, and the other thing, and the other thing, and the other thing. And I'm really, it's a real place of beauty and healing. And I feel really, for real, privileged to be able to write a little bit about like, there are so many different ways that all kinds of autistic people, however we are autistic, are punished for the ways we communicate or don't communicate to holistic, ableist society. And so much of the time, the ways that we communicate, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, through gesture, I'm thinking about Mel Baggs's In My Language, where they were like, yeah, it's not like this can of soup means the word to be. Like, I have a relationship with all of these things that are seen as not alive, and this is my language. I have a completely different language than a holistic world. Anytime we insist on that and we refuse translation, it's both pushing back, and I would say, yeah, creating new autistic poetic forms, but we're also just like doing autistic poetic and communication forms that have always been there and that we're always evolving because we're so innovative, right? Like, we're so much less boring than the fucking normals, with their little whatevers, right? So, and then, Travis, I don't know if this is kind of going back to a question that you started to talk about, but I just want to say briefly, like, I think that there is a modeling, like, I like that quote about like poetry starts after what's possible ends, but I also think that for me, I'm really about writing it down. I think there's a crypt poetic strategy of, who reads poetry? A lot of sick and crazy, isolated people who have a book and the library and like an Amazon membership, so they get an ebook. And I think a lot of the times, because of ableism, autism, and holisticism, disabled, deaf, and neurodivergent communities we can be kept from community. We're kept from each other. We're even kept from self-identity a lot of the time, right? And it's both a survival strategy and oppression. And so a lot of people's first disabled community is a book. And so I think that there is a bit that I'm trying to do of both writing down specific crypt moments and also possibility modeling, and not in a simplistic way, but in a like, you can have a weird crippled life out here. Here's some ways it looked. And I will just end by saying that, like, it's really important for me always to push back against the idea that abled people, hearing people, and holistic people are the audience. And it gets me in a lot of trouble and a lot of stressful conversations with editors, because they're like, no, you got to write for Barbara in Nebraska. And I'm like, I don't actually, because I could die tomorrow, and I actually want to write to people who are my audience, who are autistic, deaf, and disabled BIPOC people. And if Gloria Anzaldúa can make white people who are English speakers fucking read Spanish and fucking look it up, why can't we insist that abled people think about something other than themselves? The end. Check.
Right. I think that disabled people have always done interesting things with form. I think about, what is the ancestry and I also think that, like, we can't allow white people to have form. Like, the definition of form has been made in the image of English form. that doesn't mean that's all form that there is, you know, like there are so many ways to think about form. I think about Audre Lorde's form a lot because it was repeatable for her, right? It was repeatable. And we see the effects of that form in, say, you know, even in someone like that's, you know, considered more, whatever, even like people like Rupi Kaur, you can see the ways that she uses and remixes Audre Lorde's form. You can see the way that many contemporary poets that write for audiences that are underserved by poetry use Lorde's form, use Clifton's form. Okay, so I think that, you know, form gets a bad rap because it's associated with white people, but it doesn't have to be. Like, white people don't own form. But even when you think about how disabled people, even of the past, have used form, I think about like Don Juan. Like, I think about something like that, where it's like, okay, so you're gonna write this extremely sexual, extremely long poem in completely perfect form, and it's gonna be about stuff that, you know, even a novel maybe shouldn't touch. And then you're just going to put it out and you're just going to walk, like, just limp around being bi, doing that in, you know, the time period in which you lived. Like, I think that that's interesting to me. I think about Oscar Wilde's villanelles, you know, like, I think about like all of the transgressive ways form is used. And I think that, like, one thing that I tell my students is that rhyme is pleasurable. It's pleasurable. Like, people like it when things rhyme. It's almost primal. And so I think that when you work with something that people do not want to talk about and you add traditional form and rhyme, it increases people's tolerance of it. Not that I think that visibility or, you know, representation or respectability, I mean, has literally no place in my life, but I do think that, you know, even with each other, like, there's like a tolerance building exercise. I know some people who, you know, like, even people who you would think do identify as disabled will come with the differently abledness, you know, like with all kinds of other ways, but like, no one objects to a rhyme, you know, like, no one objects to beauty. And I do think that form, it's like templated beauty, but it doesn't have to be.
I just want to say, rhyme, it's a memory device. That's why country music works. That's why a lot of things work. You can remember that shit. That's cognitive access. Okay, I'll shut up.
I love this conversation so much. I'm thinking a lot lately about form as, I don't know, maybe less about like the inherited, what my students think of as just like dead white dudes who stole older forms anyway, right? But as more of a like a material constraint, I'm thinking about the way that the page has always refused me, and the deaf tradition, that to be deaf and write in English, or to voice my own poems in English, quite frankly, comes with a particular kind of baggage or burden and betrayal, that culturally or historically I'm doing something that you know, further oppresses or ostracizes a community to which I have deep and precious ties. And one thing that I've started doing lately is writing deaf contrapuntals. It's just what I'm calling them. I don't really know what they are. But the idea of a deaf contrapuntal is that for every text that there is in English on the page, there is also a text in ASL that does not coexist, cannot coexist, because publishing and current editorial practices won't allow it, or doesn't approve of it, or doesn't think that it's poetry, because they can't archive it or put it in a book and sell it. And there's so much pushback about whether or not these poems actually exist, or how would they know, or how might they receive them if it is that there's no evidence of the ASL on the page. And I think it's just such a telling moment around what we understand form to be, as if the page itself is not an inherited and consensual constraint. And I find it really fruitful and liberating to write poems that have an ASL version and then a third contrapuntal sort of weaving of the two that creates a third narrative. And I don't mind. In fact, I delight in the fact that most folks who want access to it can't have it and might have to work or interrogate why they can't have it, but might have to work a little bit harder to locate a way in, which is all part of a larger conversation about like, why is it that I'm reading my poems in English at all? And why don't all of us know ASL, since it's not a foreign language? So yeah, I'm interested in taking forms indeed that are inherited, but also making them bend and behave in ways that resolve the problem of the page, which is not at all accessible to me linguistically. And it's quite exciting and frustrating, and I want more of it.
My question is, well, this may be a question we often get asked. Who and what are your creative influences, and specifically which activists and activist traditions have shaped your poetic style and voice? And you mentioned Lorde before, but I'm very curious who is informing your poetics, and what kinds of traditions are you in dialogue with?
Yeah, I mean, pretty obviously Leah. I don't like, not to gas, like, I mean, Leah knows this, but like, not to like gas you up or anything, but like, yeah, like I think I'm like aware that without Leah's work, I would likely not be a writer at this point. And I was not aware that I could write the things that I wanted and have any sort of career. Like that was not, like, I wasn't aware of that until at like 16, 17, I read the Femme Shark Manifesto, and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I'll write things, I guess, and maybe someone will let me write a book. That could happen, I guess. Because I guess Love Cake came out shortly after that. And yeah, who else? Of course, Lorde, you know, like I grew up reading Audre Lorde. I grew up reading June Jordan. I grew up reading Cheryl Clark. I grew up in a recitation tradition. So reciting Hughes and James Weldon Johnson, Gil Scott-Heron was a big deal where I'm from. Yeah, I think I operate in a pretty traditional Black literary vein, you know, some of whom, of course, were disabled. But as far as activists, you know, it's hard to say because like so many disabled people who are in the disability justice movement, like all of our legends are still, well, not everyone anymore, but, you know, it's a younger movement. And so, you know, I work at SINS. That's my day job. I work at SINS. And so I feel like, you know, the SINS cadre of activists is definitely dear to me. I was intellectually and politically raised by older HIV and AIDS activists. And I think that that's pretty much the foundation of my personal politics, something in between the two.
Yeah, I am also the poet that I am, and especially the educator that I am because of Leah's work, and the way that I was so fortunate in this kind of desperate and life-changing way to come up under the I don't even know if I could call it guidance of queer crip friends of color. It wasn't guidance so much as a reckoning, and that included SINS, and that included folks like Laura Hershey and Hattie Byrne and Constance Merritt. Some of these people I never met. Some of them I only met through their texts. Likewise, deaf poets like Ella May Lentz and Patrick Graybill and Clayton Valley, this like large queer family of deaf poets and activists who I don't think always wanted to be activists. I learned a lot from watching how they balanced those callings and the desire to be people, and how much it costs and how much work it is to just be people, much less artists. But so much of what I know about how to move in the world and how to be better in the world, I learned watching Leah, from community organizing and arts education to just, you know, knowing when to toss money in the hat because you have it. I feel so lucky to be a part of that, to be a part of your community and lineage. And how lucky to be alive for it when so many of our kin are not.
Oh, guys, I don't know. I'm just this guy. I have a bumper sticker in my car that says "What a time to be gay and alive," which I'm like, yeah. It's weird. Thank you. I don't know, Meg. We were at Mills together. We met because my car. I had like $89 in the bank, and my car had a boot on it, and I had to go to Detroit, and the car was going to be towed, and you were like, "I just got my student loan. I'm going to give you $200," and I was like, "Great." And just yeah, funny side note things. And also the Femshark Manifesto is. Cyrée, thank you for shouting at the Femshark Manifesto, and I'm always just like. Yeah, but this is all like Mills College 2007 because I got stoned with my friend instead of doing my like rhetoric 2 homework with the old white lady, and then we wrote this thing that ended up having a lot of impact, that was just a lot of all caps and swear words, right? And intersectional, disabled, feminism of color, I guess. My influences, I was one of those working class poor kids who NYU would go the full ride to and then completely just throw you out to dry, and you end up dropping out or barely making it through because you're surrounded by rich kids. But what it meant was that my mom had to let me go to New York because I could go to school for free. And it meant that I was in New York for early slam. Like I started college in '93, and so I was living down the block from the New York but also just like lots of open mics, like lots of spoken word. And it was before slam kind of got codified. So my experience of going to the New York Poets Cafe it was like poetry church, and it was really very Black, very brown, pretty fucking queer. People just getting up, and you got 3 minutes and you shoot your shot and you tell the truth. And it was a wide variety of styles and forms. Like it wasn't just kind of like the same line 3 times, the same line 3 times, the same line 3 times. It was really just, whatever people wanted to do. And I was too shy to get up there. And in fact, I remember, actually it was later when the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill came out, and I was like, I'm over 25. It's all over. I'm not going to have a career, and like definitely slam really lifted up the, like, you've got to be 21 and make it thing. So there's some crip in there. But I digress. I would say early spoken word. Then when I left the States and I moved to Toronto, definitely I would just say like Canadian second wave queer Black, Indigenous, and South Asian and Asian feminisms, like the whole Sister Vision crew. Sister Vision Press, which was the Toronto press that was analogous to Kitchen Table, which is founded by Makeda Silvera, and a bunch of other queer, mostly Caribbean, Black, and South Asian women. People like Beth Brandt, working class, queer, disabled, Indigenous writer, like, the kinds of events that people were throwing and the kinds of formally rigorous and deeply in our own cultural traditions as Black, South Asian, Indigenous, Caribbean, and Latinx creators in the late 90s. Like, that's why I'm the writer I am, because when I got out of college, I was like, I can't fucking write. I don't know. I mean, despite slam, despite everything, definitely Lorde, definitely Jordan, definitely Christos, definitely Sapphire, always those two, always as 2 of the high priestesses of like, you can just write it. American Dreams is the reason why I'm not dead. Like Sapphire's courage and brilliance as being like a Black. When I first started seeing her read, I saw her as femme, but, Black, sex worker, survivor, very, I don't know if she'd use the word mad, but very psychically different person who just, Mickey Mouse with a Scorpio. Thank you. Thank you for writing the real truth. Like, that's why I could write mine. And then, I feel like, though, I didn't write any disabled poems really till Body Map in a lot of ways. Like, they're in there, but the thing about slam was it was like, there was still a thing, especially later, of like, oh, if you write disability poems, that's just kind of like, oh, that's sad. You know, like I remember Tara Betts years ago being like, yeah, the thing with slam is they want everything to end with a yeah, and they don't know how to do that with disability, or they didn't used to. So when I have my story of sneaking out actually to go see the Sins Invalid show in 2008. And at the time, like I was co-running Mangoes with Chili with Sherry Gillette, which was a big queer and trans, black and brown performance troupe. Um, I was going to shows 3 or 4 days a week in Oakland. I didn't tell anybody I was going to the disabled show, you know, because I didn't want anyone to know. And then I will always remember hearing Patty's voiceover saying, is this safe? Are you safe? Are you sufficiently insulated from us, the disabled, the deviant, you know, the defective? Or are you afraid you're going to be stained by our leaking needs? Where I was like, someone took the inside of my disabled heart that I never say out loud, and they fucking said it in front of these 300 Crips. And I was like, oh, there's an audience. There's an audience. I can tell my disabled brown story. I can do it. I wouldn't be here without Sins. And yeah, I mean, building on what both Cyrée and Meg said about like, this is a younger movement, totally. And I would say like, it's interesting because I feel like, I mean, I still feel like the new kid in a lot of ways, because for me, I was just like, I felt like I was touching the hem of Leroy Moore, right? Who's been writing disabled Black poetry since the late 90s, since, you know, Disabled Black Man with a High IQ and beyond. Patty's work, you know, Stacey, I met Stacey Park Milburn as a 19-year-old queer Korean poet in the South, blogging and writing poetry. Um, Aurora Levins Morales, right? You know, like who I knew before she identified as disabled, but definitely with Kindling, definitely with her blog, tremendously foundational. And and I would say that my influences, I feel like I'm in co-evolution with many, many other disability justice creators, and that we're evolving together as a movement. So like I mean, I don't even want to name everyone because I think we're going to leave people out. But what I will say is I have that story I tell repeatedly, of course, about when Care Work was about to come out. And I got into a huge argument over which booksellers association codes were going to be on the back, and they wanted to put health on the back, and I was like, no, you got to put disability. And they were like, well, there's not a disability section in the bookstore. And I was like, yeah, there is. And I was like, there's not, but there is sometimes, and there will be. And guess what? And it's not just because of Care Work. It's because of Kia Brown. It's because of like so many people. There's there's a disability section in Third Place, which is my local bookstore. It's always been there at Left Bank, Elliott Bay. And I feel like I'm thinking about Dustin Gibson's piece, like creating a home for disability justice in the library, where he was just like, disability justice is, to quote Tupac, a place where we kick it, a place where we belong, where he's like, fuck the fucking Dewey Decimal System. We have a DJ section in our local public library in Pittsburgh where Audre is next to Leroy Moore, you know, where we have all of this mixing of genre because the genres are meant to keep us apart as disabled Black and brown people. And I'm just like, I feel like I am witnessing what's always been there, but we're making it happen, much more of a creation of a moment of disabled writers, disabled BIPOC writers in particular, being able to have conversations with each other. And I want to say I'm really excited for this fall when Alice Wong and Sammy Shock's books and mine are all going to come out at the same time. And I just want there to be more all the time. And I want us to live to get old. So that's probably some things I'm forgetting, but I must stop. Oh, every disabled BIPOC person, ever, Sins, all the collectives. Also, just want to give a shout out to people who were early disabled BIPOC zine makers, like poets like Quolie Driscoll, Billy Rain, who were all self-published, and who I think sometimes people were like, wait, who's that? And I'm like, right, because it was 20 years ago, but their writing is incredibly important. That's it.
Yeah, not to be a full librarian on here, but you know, the Dewey Decimal System was intended to put everything that was not like things that white dudes made all the way in the back. Like it's just what it does, and also all the way in the front. So like really the bulk of the library is like a literal pushing aside of our concerns. So I think that, you know, if anyone is watching this and they're in the library, you know, I can say as, you know, a librarian, that the best way to have a more diverse library is to get rid of the Dewey Decimal System. Get rid of it. Why do you have the Dewey Decimal System? It's 2022. Please stop.
It's kind of the DSM of the library, right? There you go.
I mean, how do I follow up? a one-liner like that, Leah. I'm keeping track of time and I respect everyone's time and the time people are investing in this event. So I want to ask, this is perhaps the question that I was most excited to ask. And I think it's one of the most difficult ones because I don't feel like I have a good answer for this. So my question is, one of the things this event takes necessarily for granted is the compatibility of poetry and disability justice in the first place. Where do you see their tensions and where might those tensions emerge in your own work?
I think one thing, sorry, Leah, go ahead. One thing that's on my mind that's been said already this evening, and also better in other places, is about the prioritization of particular kinds of readers and particular kinds of audiences, and the assumption that we are not the intended audience, or I'll just speak for myself. Like, I was brought up to believe that like my audience was hearing, that all of my readers are hearing, and oh Lord, how comfortable that is for everybody. Which makes me think that I know this is a question about disability justice and incompatibilities with poetics, but I think it very quickly bleeds into or smears maybe into disability poetics. And I think disability poetics is a lie. I think it's often about us and by us, but not for us. And I think that the non-disabled gaze is an ongoing negotiation, argument, fight, whatever metaphor you want that's unhelpful, that describes the way that I often feel that we're being asked at least to bend or pander or disclose for folks who are not kin. And that feels dangerous to me, and sometimes not worth it, because I'm not interested in, you know, spending my art to teach you how to tolerate me. And I think that's what disability poetics often asks, is teach me how I can become more comfortable. And I dislike it greatly. So that's one way that's on my mind.
I can go if that's Cyrée, did you want to go? I mean, I never think poetry is the problem in and of itself, but the poetic establishment sure is. And I think, I mean, Travis, in terms of your question, I always just want to be like, go read the 10 principles and then have a conversation about it. So if you're taking in this event, go look up the 10 principles of disability justice, new and expanded, on Sins and Ballot, and give them some money. And I mean, just to cite what some of them are, it's an anti, like, we've been saying for a while as DJ people, it's like, oh man, they're just trying to co-opt us and be like, oh, it's the new term, and not change anything, you know, and be like, let's make some disability justice toothpaste. And I'm like, this is an anti-capitalist movement. It's an anti-colonial movement. It's an anti-white supremacist movement. It's, you know, it's leadership of the most marginalized. It's cross-disability politics and coalition politics, all of which are not simple sound bites, and their practices and their learnings. So, I mean, in terms of what stands in the way, I mean, I think the capitalist control of the publishing industry stays in the way, right? Like, I think the ways that academia work stands in the way. I think, you know, I'm somebody who is the kind of disabled who could barely make it through school twice, but I made it, and I can talk fast sometimes. And there's plenty of people who are just as great poets as I am, who do not have the kind of brain that can compartmentalize and like cough up a decent SAT and get a scholarship and make it through school. Right? So there's a ton of, like, you know, where disability justice poetics is in prisons, in psych wards, you know, in long-term wards. And, you know, I mean, I think as DJ people, we know that. And then I think that those of us, those of the non-kin who are discovering us, which is always a great experience, the doctrine of discovery, we know it well, they don't know it. And they also aren't invested in changing the system so that there's not, you know, the big five publishing system where there's like big corporations that own what 90% of the publishing in North America, and so there's all of that, and then there's the ways in which, I mean, I'm always like, man, for a genre that on the surface is like anything can happen, so much poetry, you know, reading structures, magazines, things really have to be a certain way. And I just think about the impact there is with that for so many disabled and deaf poets I know. Like, I'm thinking about Noemi Martinez, who I remember she said a while ago, she was like, you know, I have anxiety that's so intense, I can't go to a traditional reading and like stand up there and read to all these people. She's like, I want to have a reading where the lights are turned off and like we're reading, like no one's looking at me, or when I'm standing with my back to the audience and it's not a diva mood, it's an access move, right? You know, I think about conversations I have with different writing students where they're like, do I have to submit to these weird ass academic journals? And I'm like, should is a weird question. I mean, no. And, you know, like the way the system's set up, it'll be like, yeah, no, you got to do. Or if you want to get an NEA or all of that stuff. I think about the way funding's set up, just the inaccessibility of funding in all ways, the way it's not even talking about basic access. And I think about things like, okay, I'm hot shit, Leah Lakshmi, whatever, but there's this fellowship in Seattle, the ARC Fellowship, that I didn't get twice, and they both years I applied, it was actually aimed at, they have different themes, but there was a theme around disability, and the second time I was like, can I see my feedback about why I didn't get it? And they said, and the feedback was, yeah, the writing sample doesn't consistently display excellence. And I was like, wow, and I mean, it's not even about like, well, I'm excellent, it's like, yeah, no, I misspell shit a lot, and I have a checkered career, and there's months where nothing happens but sickness and sadness. So no, I'm not consistently excellent in the abled eye. And if I'm not, there's so many people I know who, you know, I have friends who are great poets who are still working on their GAD, right? So I think there can be a lot of lip service page like social justice and access, but it still is like a smart special people's club where smart and special is defined in really holistic, abled hearing ways, right? And even just the idea of like, you can fart, you can cry, you need to go to the bathroom, so you need to stop. I mean, I'm even thinking about like the tradition that it was so big in slam and other places of you've got to memorize it because if you read off the page, that's just not as good. And for years, I didn't know how to say, like, because of my disabilities, I cannot memorize my poetry. I can't memorize a fucking recipe I've made 300 times. Like, how do you want me to, like, memorize this? And, you know, and that's not even bringing in, like, I'm thinking about the story where we had a Mango show where we were like, hey, you know, we've got wheelchair users. Is your stage accessible? And they were like, oh, yeah. And then we go, and there's this beautiful ramp backstage. And we're like, oh, great. The next year we go back, and we're like, oh, they've got the ramp. We don't have to check about access. We show up. There's no ramp. And I'm like, what happened to the ramp? And they're like, well, we built it for you because we knew you had those people. And after the show, we destroyed it. And I was like, you destroyed the ramp? And they were like, yeah, I don't know. I picture them, like, beating it to death. But I was like, and then, you know, one of my friends who was in the show was just like, we have to remember the abled will take any excuse to destroy access at all costs, right? So that, you know, and I think that simultaneously we're in a disability justice artistic renaissance. And then at the same time, it's like the beat goes on with the same oppressive bullshit shit. And, you know, every oppressed community who does cultural work, which is all of us, we have, you know, there's cycles where we're the flavor of the week and there's funding and then it all goes away because they did it 2 years ago. So I really think about how our strength as disability justice people and creators is that we've always done it our fucking way. So how do we continue to build doing that? And how do we not depend on this funding moment that DJ's happening? Because I don't think it's going to last, especially if we continue to threaten imperialism as we do. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that the Gaggarino is that we're in a race against time, right? And I think I saw that first when like anthologies about disability justice started coming out with no access information. So that's when you know you're moving, or whatever you're working towards is being co-opted really rapidly. And because if you have disability justice without the disability justice, like what do you have, right? Like you can put as many disabled people into an inaccessible space as you want, but it's not disability justice. So we can see that our elders in particular will be bypassed, and because of the rapid co-optation of disability, and not just in literary spaces, right, in activist spaces as well, the co-optation of disability justice, you will see these moments pop up, and people will be like, oh, celebrity, oh, economy that prizes some people over others. No, our elders don't live long. They don't live long. We're lucky to have 50-year-olds in this movement. So if you don't put them let them do an anthology now, they may never do an anthology. I think about Patty, and Patty is a poet, right? Patty is a poet. Patty is an excellent poet. In fact, if Patty was not a poet, there probably would not, like, the popularity of the disability justice movement would be much lower, because the 10 Principles is poetry and it's highly readable, right? So I think about how many people had to get passed up, like Leroy, like to get down to people who have no discernible connection to the disability justice movement and who don't even be coming around. So as much as I may like their poetry, and I do, I'm a fan of all of them. But at the same time,
you're also going to be like, Leroy who? And I'm going to be like, shoot me right now.
But that's the thing. Like, it's like, okay, great, bring new people into like a literary space. That's great. But don't neglect our elders, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, they're only going to be around for a second. Like, I think about Mel Baggs's death and then Stacey's death, like right after, right? Those people were my own age. they were my age. And so if folks my age are likely to die, I was told that I was only going to live until 25. So I'm always happy to be here, soon to be 33, I hope. Like it's urgent. Like, it's not like other movements where there's no life expectancy that you're told immediately upon getting ill. Like, there is actual stakes for passing over certain people and choosing others at random to suit your needs, and to sell a book. Like, there are actual consequences for everyone, because it means that certain voices will never be heard in the public square. And I think that, you can take what disabled people are saying as griping. And look, I said it then, I'll say it now. I don't like to edit. I'm not a good editor. So it's not like I'm vying for it. I'm not. But I think that ultimately the poetry establishment and the literary establishment doesn't realize what they do when they try to assemble these little patchworks of artists they'd like to work together when the topic is about a literary movement, right? That they were ill-equipped and didn't have the range to actually complete for anyone. So who's going to be able to submit to an inaccessible journal where you don't have alt text on your images? Who will be able to submit? Who will not? It baffles me. It baffles me. And I think that because I feel these ways, I understand that poetry for me is a hobby. It's sometimes a lucrative hobby, but it's never going to be my number one, because I'll never be its number one. Just never. And I had to make my peace with that.
Can I just, I just want to second everything you said, and I just also wanted to say, wait, it was there. Where was it? Damn it, is it gone? Wait, what was the poetry is a hobby thing. Yeah, this is interesting because, like, here we are, poets, and both of you just said really nice things about my work, which thank you. It's interesting because, like, I mean, one, when people were like, how did you get to where you got to? I'm like, I moved to Canada for my early career where they have federal disability and deaf arts funding. Yeah, and where they will also, oh, do you need access support to apply for an arts grant? Well, we will give you money for that. We will give you money for a PCA to help you write your grant. It's white settler colonialism, but man, it has a little bit of social democracy. And just even that little bit, like, I was able to get little bits of money. And then the small presses had more little bits of money from the government. And so my point is that, like, I came up as a poet. I identified as a poet. I was known as a poet for years. And to me, sometimes poetry, I wouldn't say it's a hobby quite, but kind of, because what's happening now is there's more of a market. Since I wrote care work, people are like, you can come and tell us how to DJ. You can be a like how-to guy. You can be a trainer. You can be a fix-it bitch. And often they want really prosaic stuff. But there's money in it, and of course we all need that. But I'm also like, but Cyrée, I just want to say thank you for, everything you said, but in particular, I just want to lift up how Patty Byrne is a poet, how like Patty Byrne and Leroy Moore, the two of the most foundational, the founders of Fit Sins, two of like the original people who founded, like, I think arguably actually everybody who's like the big six who are referred to as the people who kind of dreamed up DJ as a framework, they're all creative writers and they're all poets and storytellers. And that's not an accident. And when people are like, what is sins? What is this thing you call sins and valid? And early on I was like, well, it's a bunch of disabled black and brown and or queer trans people doing performance art about sex. And then people would, ooh, and then they'd be like, what do you mean? Like, don't you want to do is like, what is disability overcome workshop? And I was like, no, like, Patty, I would just think about like when Patty's like, okay, so, Leroy's going to be naked and you're going to be pulling the scroll with all the ableist slurs out of his mouth. And, that's how we're going to get to people, right? Like, that's the thing in terms of like how DJ and poetics is not at war with each other. It's like DJ Poetics is an organizing tool because, as Patty said, and I paraphrase, she's like, when you do poetry and performance as disability justice people, you get with people's dreams and nightmares in a way that a little checklist or a little like how not to hate the handicapped is never going to penetrate. But, you're never going to be able to forget that moment with Leroy. You're never going to be able to forget all this fucking fucked up art we just made you see about everything that's your worst nightmares as able people or your biggest dreams as disabled people. And that's the thing, it's like, there's so much pressure to have poetics be a hobby, a sideline, but it's the core of what we do as people trying to change the world. I feel like I'm taking up a lot of space, but I just wanted to jump in with that, and I'm going to shut up now.
I think for paying attention to time, I want to thank everyone for the honesty and candor of their answers. Like, these are things I've always wanted to ask each of you, and I feel like I got that chance to ask the questions I've always felt really committed to. And I think something, as maybe a way of ending, I think there's something that I've noticed about our responses is the ambivalence that we all have about being legitimized as capital P poets and capital disability justice people. And I think the question remains, who is that legitimacy given by, and what are the consequences of such legitimacy? If it is going to be co-optation, there are deep concerns about the future of what we do. And I think that's why I spend a lot of time trying to think about tensions and places of conflict, because I think that's going to inflect how our movement moves forward. And I'm just so grateful that I can be in dialogue with each of you. And I feel like that's what good poetry does. It's in dialogue all the time. And I'm indebted to the fact that we can have this conversation here. So with that, thank you all for tuning into our broadcast. And I look forward to many more conversations to come.